Hello, I'm Sally Pointer. In my video on preparing burdock fibres for basketry, we looked at how to get a good core material. In this video, we're looking at preparing the bindings and starting to weave our basket. First thing we need to do is go out hedge bothering. Having prepared the burdock stalks for the centre of my basket, I need to have a think about the bindings. I've decided this year I'm going to try bramble. Now bramble I've used many times as a cordage material, not so often as a binding for baskets, although it has a very, very long history for it. Now of course brambles are quite vicious. It's well worth wearing gloves when you harvest them. I do have a video just on preparing bramble for cordage, but just as a recap, so you don't have to go looking for it if you don't want to. All you do is you trace a bramble back, cut it off, take off the spines, peel off the outer bark, and that's pretty much it for our purposes. As I said, there is a separate video all about that, and I will show you a little bit of the prep in a second. Now I need my secateurs and an extra glove, and I'll harvest some. Back at home, it's quite a modest little pile of bramble stalks, but they'll do for starters. I can always harvest more. So I'm just going to prepare these. Like I mentioned, there is a separate video on preparing brambles for cordage, but this little lot is going to turn into this. Now I've split things down into relatively fine strands, and I can subdivide later. I could use them now, but they're going to shrink and loosen, so the important thing to do is to coil them up, give them a few hours to dry out, and then I'll just damp them when I'm ready to start making the basket. I'm about ready to make a start on my basket. This is the burdock we collected in the last video. I've actually got about 8 or 9 stalks worth here, so you can see the yield's quite good. It's not enough for a big basket, but it'll do for a little one. And for the bindings, this is the bramble bark that we picked a little bit earlier. It's all dried out now. I'm going to need to damp it before we start working with it. But first, I'm just going to blend this together. Each bit of this was picked on different days, slightly different weather conditions. I'd have scraped some better than others, so just by equalising it just a tiny bit, I can make sure that the quality is fairly standard throughout. That always makes life a little bit easier. That should do it. All I'm going to do in a second is run that under the tap and then give it 20 minutes or so to soften. It doesn't need to be soggy, it just needs to be enough to make it a little more flexible than it is now. And exactly the same with this. The bramble strips themselves, they're pretty strong, they're fairly flexible, but they'll work even better when they're slightly damp. So I'll give those a quick rinse, and then we'll have a look at the very simple tools we're going to be using. The basket that I'm planning to make today is going to be a very simple coil basket. This little one is actually in pine needles and nettle, but it's the type of thing that I think we should achieve. What shape this one's going to be, how big it's going to be, well, we'll have to wait and see, won't we? You don't need many tools for this sort of basket. You're going to be working with strips of your core material, which you bind and stitch together. So all you really need is a needle. Now I'm going to start off with a little bone needle, but to be honest, that's just because I like it and it's to hand. If what you've got is a large-eyed metal needle, well, that's good too. Just use whatever you have. Some types of materials you don't even need a needle at all. Now I've also got a new little gadget that Gareth's just a second made for me. This is a little bronze tube, and this is hopefully going to help me gauge the amount of core material I use so that I get a nice even basket. It's literally just come out of the workshop. I haven't tried it yet, so let's give it a whirl, see what happens. Oh, and a cup of tea, because I like to work with a cup of tea. So to start off, I'm going to get a little bundle of fibres, about half the thickness of the ones I anticipate using. So I'm really aiming to be bundling about that much together. That's in my burdock. And I've also got a strand of the bramble. So it's all gone nice and floppy now that it's been slightly damped. I'm going to put the needle onto one end. Come on, cooperate. And then using the other end, and very roughly the middle, I'm going to start, and it doesn't really matter which way you go, but I'm mostly right-handed. I'm going to start binding the middle. Now, it can take a moment to get your hands working in a coordinated fashion, but that's fine. You just take your time. It might even be easier just to roll this. That's a better idea, isn't it? So I'm going to roll a couple of centimetres, an inch, doesn't really matter what form of measurement you use. And then a little bit more, a little bit more. So I'm covering this bit quite closely. And then I'm going to fold this in half. Now, if I've got this amount right, it's going to fit into my tube. If I haven't, I'll start again. Oh, I think I probably could have done with a little bit less. A little bit less. That's all right. Nice thing about things at the beginning is it's easy to undo it. So I'll just untwiddle that. Does mean I can show you the start twice. Let's take a bit off that. Okay. In fact, this time, why don't I check that it fits through the tube? Oh, if I had a brain, I'd be dangerous. So the idea is, that's better, isn't it? But I've got to allow for the wrappings. So, laying my wrapping along the middle and then twiddling back over it. This is going to be the very, very, very central bottom bit of the basket. And then bend that round, and we'll just keep going around it just a couple of times, make sure that's nice and tight. Now then, will this go through my tube this time? Yes, I think it will. Now the idea of this, I'm going to take the needle off so I can pull the thread through, but that's okay. The idea of this tube is it's going to help me make sure I get the same amount of burdock going into it all the time. You don't have to have one of these. You could even make one out of a scrap of leather or plastic or anything you've got to hand and a bit of tape. Otherwise, just keep your eye on it and try and make sure you've got roughly the same amount going in at the time. The idea here is that as I start to run out, I can just put new bits in and they'll feed through and keep my gauge nice and steady. So we've got our little loop on the end there. In fact, can you see properly? Let me make a clear space so I've got a clear background. And when I can bend it round on itself, oh, forgot to rethread my needle, didn't I? There we are. Right, a couple of false starts, but that really, really doesn't matter. When you can bend it round on itself, you're going to pop the needle up through that little eye in the middle. And just pull that up nice and snug. In fact, I might go through it a second time just to make sure it's secure. The bramble's pretty strong, but I don't want to tug too hard. Now from now on in, I'm slightly ambidextrous, so sometimes I work in this direction, sometimes I turn it over, work in the other. It doesn't really matter, just work in whichever way you're comfortable with. The idea is that you go round once, twice. I'm going to go for 3. I like 3. So my binding thread's coming out from over the top. I'm going to curl it round, and then I'm going to go from underneath into the centre of my basket. And I'm going to go back to the underside of this. So you've sort of made a figure 8. So I'll do that again. Round once, round twice. Now I want to leave a little bit of a gap in between because I want the burdock and the bramble to show. Curl it round, come in from underneath, go back to the underside. Go around once, twice, 3 times. Now I'm getting past that first eye point now, so I'm going to start bringing my needle into whichever bit of the basket is lying immediately underneath. And once, and twice. Now I need to move this along a bit. Around 3 times. Into the underside. Round to the top. And every now and then I need to look at this, and I've got gaps in there so I can fit a little bit more of my burdock into it. So I'm just going to periodically wiggle a little bit in, and that should feed through quite nicely. 1, 2, slide that down a bit, 3, and bring your needle up just wherever it needs to make a good stitch. Some basket makers like to go through the actual group of centre cords themselves. Some, and I think I tend to be one of them, like to go in between the courses. I don't think there's really a right or a wrong way as long as you get the basket you want. 2, 3. Now I've still got quite a bit of my bramble left here, but as I start to run out, I'll lay the new bit in along the core for a few stitches, just so that it's really, really well secured. And then when I need to swap over, I can just change the threads and everything's going to stay together. 1, 2, 3. So I'm starting to get a rhythm here. I've ended up with a very slightly oval base, which is fine by me. I don't tend to overthink things like these baskets. There are amazing basket makers out there who make beautiful, beautiful, technically perfect baskets. I like mine to be just a little bit rustic, so particularly when I'm trying to film and talk at the same time, I'm not going to beat myself up if it's just a little tiny bit skew width here and there. Okay, time to put another little bit of burdock into my tube. This is working really well. Traditionally, this technique is used for things like biscuits, where they'd use straw down the middle, and actually things like the bramble on the outside. And often a section of a cow's horn is used to control the gauge of the straw, which is where I got the idea for this from. I really like my little bronze one. I think I might get Gareth to make me some more of those in different sizes. I can see that being really, really useful. But like I said, you can improvise those or just manage without. 1, 2, 3. So I'm nearly ready to change threads. So I'll show you that bit. Then I'm going to settle down with my tea, do a few rounds, and we'll see where we get to. Okay, just go around once to anchor it. So I need to select the piece of bramble I want to use next. I'm trying to use the longish bits to start with. That's a good one. So I'll just check it over, see if there's any bits that I didn't clean properly. Because I'm always in a rush when I'm doing these things. Not a very patient person, really. So I'll just check that everything's the way I want it. Is it the thickness I want? And in this case, I think I could actually split it down. Once I'm happy, I'm just going to lay it along a side while I take a few stitches. 1, 2, 3, and that was my needle falling off, but we won't worry about that. It's easily put back on. Actually, we're getting short there. I should put that through the thing first. You are definitely getting a video today with all the outtakes, as it were, running in amongst it. But you know, I don't worry too much about that. 1, 2, and now I'm going to twist the new strand with the old one. Go around, give that a little twist together, the way around, and now I can put the new strand onto my needle and carry on. If when I get round to the other side I've got any sticky out bits, I just make sure those are covered over and woven in. It's that simple. So I'm going to do a little bit more. I'll turn this off for a second. And then we'll come back, hopefully, when it's a little bit bigger, and we'll see how we're getting on. And I probably will have drunk my tea by then. 2, 3. So far, so good. 1 cup of tea later, and I'm starting to get into quite a nice rhythm here, and I've decided I'm not going to film the entire basket as one video. Partly you're going to get bored watching me go around in circles. Mostly I've got a friend who's dying to have a go at the same time, so I'm going to get this part up, then I'll make the rest of my basket and I'll do another little video to show how to finish it off. So I'm just going to recap what's been going on. So my core is burdock, and my little tube's working out brilliantly. When I need to put a new bit into the cone, it is just a case of poking the ends in, and then that will feed through at the right thickness. Now I'm just about to come to the end of my bit of bramble here, so I'll join in a fresh bit. That looks like a good bit. So what seems to be working for me on this particular basket is to lay the new piece along, leaving a little bit sticking out. Take my, in this case, 3 stitches, 1, 2, 3. Now this is quite a short piece now, so if I take my new piece of binding and the old piece and just twist it, together, it's not even real cordage, just means I've got a nice tight wrap. I might even take an extra twist just to be on the safe side. Then I can pop my needle onto the end, find the place that my needle's going to come up. That looks about right. So that's come up from underneath, then I take it between the layers, round to the back, ease out a little bit more from my gauge, but like I said earlier, you don't have to have that. And I'm going round once, twice, 3 times. I'm not worrying about the little fluffy bits at all. This is a very rustic little basket. That is absolutely fine by me. So up from underneath, back round to the back, 1, 2, go on, 3, there we are. Bend it round, bring the needle through, and I'm just going to keep going until it's as big as I want it to be. The burdock is holding out really well. I thought I was going to run out of this much faster, so I think I'm going to keep going to about there, and then I'm going to start coming up the sides, and I'll recap that in the next video. But essentially all I'll do is I'll start very slightly bringing the edges up as I go, just to curve it, and we'll see where it goes. So hopefully that was relatively clear. I do apologise for the couple of false starts, but you know what? Half the fun with this sort of project is working it out as you go along, working with materials, celebrating the fact that natural materials are not always shot perfect. We really wouldn't want them to be, would we? And enjoying working with things that we've foraged. So happy crafting. In the next video, which hopefully will only be in a few days, this should be an awful lot bigger. I'll be recapping how to do the sides and how to finish off the end.